Ministre du Débat, the Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on Bill C-22, an act to establish the Canada Disability Benefit. In short, what this legislation seeks to do is provide an income supplement to Canadians with disabilities that complements provincial programs and supports. Unfortunately, in Canada, many persons living with disabilities are stigmatized and marginalized. Many live in poverty. Indeed, for those who are of working age and live with a disability, they are significantly more likely to live below the poverty line than those who do not live with a disability. Persons with disabilities deserve to be supported so that they can live healthy, happy, productive, and meaningful lives in which barriers are removed. And they deserve a helping hand to escape poverty. And in that spirit, I support this bill in principle. However, there is much that is unknown about this bill. We don't know who is eligible for the benefit. We don't know what amount one who is living with a disability will be entitled to receive. We don't know payment periods. We don't know how the benefit will be dealt with in terms of being indexed for inflation. We don't know what the application process looks like, and we don't even know when the benefit will take effect. Those are a lot of unknowns. And I have to say, after 7 years, and now more than a year since the government introduced a substantively similar bill on the eve of the Prime Minister calling an unnecessary and opportunistic election, that we have legislation that provides no further details. We have a minister who has been unable to shed any further light. All we have is a loose framework with all of the details to be determined at a later date, perhaps years down the road. And as a consequence, we as members of Parliament are in, I would submit, an untenable position in some respects of being asked to support a bill, the details of which are unknown in terms of the scope and impact of the Canada Disability Benefit. The Minister of Employment and Workforce Development stated in her speech quite appropriately that she is working with her provincial and territorial counterparts to ensure that this benefit does have its intended impact, that it is an income supplement, that there are not unintended consequences, including clawbacks and taxes, which would undermine the effectiveness of this benefit. Now, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that while it is good that the Minister is engaging in those discussions with her provincial and territorial counterparts, the issue of clawbacks for the disabilities community is a much broader one than simply in respect of this proposed new benefit. I certainly support providing an income supplement to low-income Canadians living with a disability. But we know that the best social program is not a new benefit. The best social program is employment for those who have the opportunity and ability to work. After all, employment provides an opportunity for dignity and self-work and provides a sense of purpose. It provides opportunities of social connectedness in contrast to the isolation that many persons living with disabilities face each and every day. Employment improves mental health and one's overall well-being. Not all Canadians living with disabilities are able to work, but many are, and many do. More, or nearly 1 million Canadians living with a disability are in the workforce, including 300,000 Canadians who are severely disabled. Many more would like to work, but for all practical purposes, they are unable to do so. They're unable to do so because when they go out and work and earn a little bit of income, their earnings are offset by the clawing back of programs and supports. We know that in some provinces, for every dollar earned, one can see a clawback of $1 or nearly $1 in social support. And so for many Canadians living with disabilities, there is in fact a disincentive to go back and be able to participate in the workforce. This is counterproductive, it's unfair, and it has the perverse effect of trapping Canadians living with disabilities in a cycle of poverty, something that this bill seeks to address. Now, as my colleague, the member for Perth Wellington, stated in his speech, my colleague, my friend, the leader of the official opposition, the member for Carleton, introduced a bill in the 42nd Parliament, Bill C-395, to address this unfairness. In short, what that bill sought to do was to ensure that any person living with a disability would never be disadvantaged, would never see more in clawbacks and taxes than what they would earn from an income from going out and working. Instead of supporting that bill, the Liberals voted against it. Now, one can debate the particulars of that particular bill, but it isn't just the member for Carleton that has raised this issue. In 2017, a unanimous report of the Standing Committee on Human Resources recommended, it was a key recommendation, that the federal government play a leadership role to ensure that Canadians with disabilities are not disincentivized from participating in the workforce. And so, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, let me say that this bill is a step in the right direction. There are a lot of details that remain, and time is of the essence. But there's more work to do beyond this bill to remove barriers, most importantly, so that Canadians living with disabilities can enjoy the same opportunities that other Canadians enjoy to be able to go out into the workforce and earn a living and have that dignity and self-worth that comes with a job. That's how you reduce barriers. That's how you reduce stigmatization and marginalization, and that's how you lift Canadians living with disabilities out of the trap of poverty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honour to have a chance to rise and join in this debate. Thank my honourable colleague for his comments and those also of many other members. It's clear that C-22 is far less than what was expected. It doesn't provide the details, that so much is left to be filled in later, and yet the needs are clearly urgent. People living with disabilities in this country are disproportionately and scandalously exposed to poverty. I'll ask my honourable colleague, for people, I totally agree that having a job is a great way to build self-worth and respect, but would he not agree with me that no one with a disability should live in poverty, whether they can find a job or not?
Honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Saanich Gulf Islands for that question. And I absolutely would concur with her that we have to do everything to ensure that Canadians living with disabilities are not trapped in poverty. And that's why we need to remove barriers so that Canadians living with disabilities can find employment, but we also have to provide other supports. This is one additional support, and it's one that I support, if it is ever rolled out the door, because it unfortunately could be some time between now and the time that the money is actually delivered to Canadians living with disabilities. It's frankly been too long.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. This is International Day of Poverty, and we want to eradicate poverty. So disabled people on the labor market, they need help. We need to eliminate the barriers. There are too many people with disabilities who are in vulnerable positions, and this was confirmed to me by an organization in my riding in Granby. And so there has to be a whole lot of thinking about access, because without that, people with disabilities will be shut out of the workplace. The honourable member.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I hear the question posed by the member for Shefford, and she raises an important issue about access and taking steps to reduce barriers to help those living with disabilities. And the member for Carleton provided a concrete measure in the way of his bill that would help persons with disabilities be able to have that opportunity to enter the workforce through 3 concrete measures within that bill, namely measurement, action, and enforcement. It was very disappointing that the Liberals voted against that very good bill.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Nunavut.
I'd like to thank the member for his intervention. I think that inevitably there will always be people with disabilities that can't be gainfully employed, and I hope that they're not going to be ineligible because of that. But I wanted to ask instead on Indigenous peoples or people who have disabilities that live in rural and remote communities, who live in communities that have a higher cost of living. And I wondered if the member agreed that maybe there needs to be a supplement for people in this benefit for people that live in rural and remote communities.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what we've got to do to address the cost of living is to tackle inflation that is at a 40-year high. It's inflation that is the result of this government's out-of-control spending, propped up with the support of the NDP. If the member is serious about reducing the cost of living, making life more affordable, that would be a good place to start.
And comments, a 30-second question. The honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, and then followed answer, hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'll just ask the member quite quickly. We're talking about the lack of benefits to people with disabilities and the poverty that's often the case and the reality for them, and the sad state where they're actually being given an option of using MAID as a solution, a terrible solution to the problem. Can the member just speak to that and maybe the reasons why we're really wanting to get behind our folks with disabilities in Canada?
Honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton, in 30 seconds or less,
Thank
please.
you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it speaks to the record of this government in not listening to persons with disabilities and disabilities rights organizations when they expressed alarm when the reasonably foreseeable criterion was struck down by one judge in one decision. And we have seen heartbreaking cases now of people who have turned to MAID because of such things as a lack of adequate housing, something completely not what MAID was set up to do. And when I asked the Prime Minister a question about that, instead of addressing the issue, instead of showing some compassion, instead he said, we're just wrapped up in ideology. I think it speaks to his attitude towards Canadians living with disabilities and how insensitive he is.
Resuming